What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This video is a bit different, and I know you will have heard me say this quite a few times recently, but honestly, it wasn't planned. Where I'm at the moment in my own journey, I treat YouTube as it's a platform for my art, basically. I can put things out into the world and hopefully they resonate with others. If not, also fine. I talked about this in the last video I made. That is really the only reason why I still make videos. So believe me when I say this was not planned. It was nothing about this. You know, there's things that I'm going to talk about in this video that I never thought I'd even share publicly online, ever. Over the last few months, I've been going through, I'd say couple months to be specific, a very weird time in my life. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about what that felt like. If I was to summarize nihilism, absurdism, ego death, an awakening inside of an awakening, which looking back now could have easily just been a metaphorical death and rebirth, whatever you want to call it, really. Both titles are appropriate. Unconscious integration. So much, like honestly so much. Just a really crazy period of my life. Mortality. This is not a how-to video. You know, I like to think that I include a lot of theory and practicality in the videos I make, but this isn't one of them. This is just honest, very messy at times, but I think a lot of us go through these sort of situations and we don't really talk about it. You know, how many dark nights of the soul have been shared publicly for the world? Because I've just gone through one, I can easily talk about it while it's fresh in my memory, and I think hopefully there might be some lessons in this that others resonate with and that others can learn from. You know, don't make the same mistakes I did type thing. I say mistakes is a bit harsh, but you guys know what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, if any of this resonates with you, or if you get something from the video, a like would really help. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. I'm still very, very much Shadow Man, so every little bit genuinely makes a difference. Okay, let's get into it. There are moments when life cracks, when the things that you've always thought was solid, and when I say solid, I mean that you've just accepted, that are just, you know, quote unquote normal to you. Things like school, if you grew up in a religious household, religion, even your idea of success, the system that we're all born into. When these things start to flicker like a glitch in a video game, and suddenly you're looking at them thinking, was this ever real? That's where it started for me. You see, I'd been on this path of questioning, shadow work, breaking old beliefs, unlearning all of the narratives that I'd inherited. And when I stepped far enough outside the cage, everything became very strange. Which is weird, right? You'd think deconditioning your mind would lead to clarity and massive perspective shifts, life-changing realizations. And don't get me wrong, it did, eventually, but short term I had basically jumped into the void without a lifeline. I jumped in and I forgot to bring a rope or a ladder to climb back out, and so I was stuck here with no choice but to face whatever was lurking in the dark. When I began doing shadow work, not just on myself but with others too, I stumbled into a realization that I was not prepared for. Most people aren't really here. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, or as though I'm sitting on top of a mountain criticizing the less enlightened. Not at all, I mean literally. They are just vessels for whatever ideas were handed to them growing up, beliefs inherited, never examined. And this was such a profound realization for me that it made me question morality altogether. Is there such a thing as good or evil, or are we just replaying the program we were given? It reminded me of that moment from The Dark Knight where the Joker says, "You see, their morals, their code, it's a bad joke, dropped at the first sign of trouble. They're only as good as the world allows them to be. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other." I couldn't shake that because it didn't feel like just cinema to me, it felt like reality. And the more I looked, the more I could see how predictable people became once you understood the identity they'd been conditioned into. For example, tell me someone's religion, or the culture they grew up in, or what political tribe they belonged to, and suddenly I could predict half of their worldview. This was not personal, it was archetypal, like they were playing a role that they never actually chose. There was no individual, there was no real self, just a persona made up of doctrine, ideology, and inherited scripts. And underneath all of that, a terrifying question emerged. How many people actually know themselves? The answer I kept arriving at, painfully, was almost none. And this was echoed again and again in the work I did with others. People couldn't tell me why they married their partner, why they'd built their entire life around a certain career, or why they believed what they believed. Ask them why they see the world the way they do, and the room goes quiet. They literally couldn't explain the fundamentals of their own existence. And this realization did not make me superior at all. Nope. It made me lonely, disoriented. I felt like I was walking through a world full of sleeping people, all repeating lines they never wrote. And it was around this time that the foundation beneath me began to really crack. It reminded me of what Brad Pitt says in Fight Club. It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything. Now that line used to sound dramatic to me. I used to think to myself, okay, well that makes sense, because realistically someone who hits rock bottom would naturally obtain that perspective. They'd then be in a position where they can gain everything. They're no longer, being dragged down by the weight of their past. But that stopped being just a movie quote and it started being my life, because one day without warning I realized I don't believe in the script anymore. I don't believe in the chase. I don't believe in the endless climb. I don't believe in this unspoken competition to be acceptable or impressive or admirable, especially in the eyes of the unconscious masses. All of it just felt very empty. And at first that was liberating, like I'd finally taken the red pill. Except instead of waking up in Zion and learning Kung Fu and being told I'm the one, or the chosen one, I felt more like Neo if he'd woken up still trapped in the pod, conscious but unable to move. Imagine that's where the movie ended. He wakes up and that's it, the end. I felt like that's what I had unintentionally stumbled into. My days became a loop. I'd wake up, I'd stare at the ceiling, I'd wonder why I should bother getting out of bed. I don't think I've ever experienced that before. I've never questioned standing up in the morning, but that's how it was. At night, old memories returned as unclear fragments of my past, like they were trying to speak but had forgotten how to communicate with me. And they didn't tell me anything, they just quietly haunted me. I wasn't sure if it was depression, to be honest with you guys. I had a sneaky suspicion, but I've never been depressed, so this was all unfamiliar territory for me. I didn't feel sad, but I didn't feel happy either. It was just blank, like someone had quietly pulled the plug. My mind had been flushed, like being ripped from a dream before you're ready, but my body was still here, dealing with the fallout. The ground didn't disappear in a dramatic earthquake, it just slowly stopped being there. When you first realize nothing is inherently meaningful, it feels like stepping into a field with no fences. No rules, no paths, just openness. And weirdly, that can feel like freedom. For a moment I actually liked it. With no script, there was nothing to live up to. Therefore, everything became a side quest. Everything was equally possible. Things I'd once dismissed, doors I'd shut before ever opening, suddenly began to call to me. But here's the strange thing about limitless freedom. Without a direction, freedom becomes free fall. You look around and there's no right way to go, so you just drift. I shattered the old story and didn't yet know how to write a new one. And when you're not living inside a story, you're just floating. And listen, this did not happen randomly either. In a strange way, I walked myself into this. All of it began because I went looking for truth. I began studying esoteric teachings, natural law, alchemy, hermeticism, various mystery schools, symbolism, hidden history, and that path eventually led me into the darker corners of the occult. People don't talk about this part much, but there is a price for knowledge. I don't care what anyone says, knowledge is not free. You want to know why? Because you pay for it with the world you used to live in. Once you see behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. And if you're not prepared, that vision can turn into poison. At the time, I didn't understand that. So I kept digging, I kept reading, I kept listening, connecting dots that most people didn't even know existed. And honestly, all of this messed with me. It's not easy for me to talk about this because I started resenting humanity. I could suddenly see how asleep we are, how we unconsciously contribute to our own suffering, to the state of the world, and to the cycles that trap us. And I started resenting humanity for it. It was like we have the capacity to wake up, and yet we don't. We choose to remain ignorant. And that polarity between what I was learning and what I was seeing in the world, between knowledge, knowing, and ignorance, turned into bitterness. It wasn't love for truth anymore. It was frustration. Dare I say even disgust. I'm pretty sure I remember Mark Passio talking about this at some point, how his own descent into occult knowledge led him into Satanism before he eventually found his way out. And part of me understood him. I never went that far, but I recognized that bitterness, that disconnection, that subtle hatred of the unconscious masses. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, at the time it felt justified, like the natural reaction to seeing reality clearly. In hindsight though, it wasn't clarity, it was imbalance. Shadow disguised as wisdom. I didn't realize it yet, but that bitterness was just another trap. During this period, I realized something that I'd somehow avoided my entire life. I am going to die. I mean, I always knew that. I'm pretty sure everyone does. It's not a hidden knowledge. But this time I felt it. It was not just an idea anymore, but I could feel it in my bones. And you know the strangest part? It didn't scare me. I've never been able to say that before. People say they've accepted death. Maybe they understand it conceptually. Again, I'm sure most of us do. But do they know it? Because there's a big difference. Every other time the thought of dying crossed my mind, I pushed it into the distant future. And it would come with hesitation, fear of losing family, fear of the unknown, that quiet anxiety of, would I feel fulfilled if I died tomorrow? Have I done enough? But now, none of that mattered. Death had this weird pull to it. Not seductive or suicidal, never that, but quiet, comforting. As if for the first time ever, I understood that everything ends, and I didn't resist it. I wasn't trying to die, I didn't want to die, but I accepted it. And in some strange way, that acceptance felt like a kind of relief, as though I'd stopped running from something that had always been following me. Back then I didn't know it, but that acceptance would eventually change how I lived. My life became a pendulum, swinging between two very different states. Some days I'd wake up charged with creativity, overflowing with energy, ready to film, ready to write, ready to express something real. Those days felt alive to me. But other days I couldn't do anything. I'd drift back into old habits, hours of video games, scrolling my phone, getting cheap dopamine wherever I could, anything to feel something. I was even sleeping around again, not out of desire really, but more out of avoidance. You know, intimacy became another way for me to disappear. Not because I wanted to, but because those things required nothing of me. They were easy, they were familiar. And numbness is easier than sitting face to face with the sheer emptiness. Even the gym, a place I'd been consistent with for years, suddenly felt pointless to me. Why am I even doing this? To look good for other people, to maintain an image. For what? To what end? And as the old identity dissolved, so did all my old reasons for doing anything. And this is where the abyss really started working on me. It wasn't violently, it wasn't outright, but it was by basically eroding everything that I couldn't justify. Nietzsche warned that gazing too long into the abyss can hollow you out. And he also said he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. But I had killed my borrowed why, the inherited why, and I hadn't grown a real one yet. And let me tell you something, without a why, even breathing feels optional. This is where I hit the bottom of the pendulum, and honestly, it's also where I think the real journey began. There's a name for this stage in pretty much every wisdom tradition. I'll give you a few quick examples. Christian mysticism, the dark night of the soul where God feels absent. In the Hebrew stories, wandering in the desert before entering the promised land. Mythology, Jonah in the belly of the whale, trapped in darkness before transformation. In nature even, winter, when everything appears dead, though life is quietly reforming beneath the surface. Different stories, same truth. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming, where all the old structures have fallen apart, but nothing new has taken shape. It feels like death, but it's actually transition. In fact, it's quite literally a universal law, rhythm. Our life is governed by cycles, life and death. And there's a line that, well, a Carl Jung line that struck me at the time. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And this was really profound to me, because suddenly all of the confusion made sense. I wasn't broken, I was descending into the roots, into the dark soil where new life begins. And a thought struck me back then. The void wasn't punishment, it was preparation. A womb disguised as a wasteland. But that doesn't make it comfortable. That doesn't make the process any easier. Again, this is the difference between theory and embodiment. It sounds nice saying that, but when you're in it, it feels like nothingness. It feels like being underwater while everyone else is breathing fine. No amount of words is going to make you feel any better while you're going through that. But if you do make it through, something grows. It's not the same life you had before, but something deeper, something truer, born from the underworld itself. Somewhere in the silence, I began to see that there are stages to this. Not like steps that you check off, but almost seasons, changes in weather. Firstly, borrowed meaning. You inherit a script. Family, religion, culture, school, etc. Everyone hands you a mask and says, this is who you are. And for a while, you believe them. Next, deconstruction. Something breaks. You look behind the curtain and you realize that none of it was absolute. None of it was set in stone. Not necessarily wrong, but inherited. Just stories. And for a moment, this feels like liberation. You see through everything. You feel like you've outgrown the world. But now the floor is gone. Thirdly, existential freedom. If nothing is inherently real, then anything is possible. Meaning becomes a choice, not a discovery, an authorship. This is where you start asking, well, if nothing matters, what do I want to matter? But it's a frightening freedom because there's no map anymore, it's just you. And then lastly, re-enchantment. Eventually, you return to the world. Not naive, not asleep, but awake and choosing. You create meaning, you love things again. Not because you're told to, but because you've decided they're worth loving. These are almost the 4 stages on the way home, as I like to call them. But I was stuck between stage 2 and stage 3. You see, the cage door was wide open, but I didn't know how to fly because I'd only just learned that flying was even an option. Deconstruction is seductive, right? There's an intoxicating clarity in tearing everything apart. It makes you feel insightful, like you're above the game everyone else is playing. And you think the only honest move is to stop playing entirely. You start trying to stand outside of everything, outside of identity, outside of desire, outside of story. At first it feels spiritual, but here is what I learned. Seeing through the illusion is not the same as stepping out of it. You can understand the prison perfectly and still never leave the cell. You can float above life and call it awakening, when really it's avoidance. You tell yourself you don't need the world, but the truth is you're just afraid to participate in it without a script. This is where so many people stop. They confuse awakening with withdrawal. They think the point is to detach, to float above everything untouched. It isn't. That is not real awakening. Awakening isn't refusing the story. It's choosing one consciously. Real awakening is stepping back into the world you just dismantled, but as someone new. Someone who sees the strings and still chooses to dance. Because the goal isn't to escape the human experience. It's to inhabit it fully, with your eyes open. No one tells you that when you tear down every meaning you inherited, you don't just lose the lies. You lose your place. You lose gravity. I thought I was waking up, but really I was slipping out of my own life. Not upward, just away. From the outside, nothing dramatic changed. I probably looked the same to other people, I'd probably speak the same, I'd laugh with the same people, but internally, something subtle had snapped. I stopped wanting things, not because I was at peace, but because nothing felt worth wanting. Desire disappeared, ambition dissolved, time stopped having direction. Every path looked equally meaningless. This is a kind of poverty you can't see from the outside. When you no longer know what to reach for, you stop reaching at all. And at first I mistook it for neutrality, some kind of higher state beyond craving. But neutrality without love is just numbness wearing spiritual robes. I wasn't freer, I was fading. There's a hidden cost to seeing through everything. When nothing is allowed to mean anything, you become a ghost in your own story. You start drifting, not living. And drifting feels safe, but it slowly kills you. Because strangely, to be alive is to be willing to care. It's to risk wanting, to give yourself to something that could break you. And when you forget how to do that, you don't feel pain. You just feel absence, a quiet sort of erasure. That was the real danger. Not darkness, but hollow light. The sterile stillness of someone who no longer knows how to touch the world. I learned that you can stand so far outside a life that you lose the thread back in. Awakening is not the exit, it's the return. Not floating above the human experience, but letting the human experience touch you again. Only then does meaning come back. Not as a rule imposed from above, but as a whisper from within. Choose something and let it matter. As the ego dissolved, so did all of my old reasons for showing up, especially the gym. I won't touch on this for too long, but for years I thought I went to the gym to look good, to appear disciplined, to feel confident, all that kind of stuff, right? But when the identity attached to all of that fell away, so did the motivation. I remember standing there one day thinking to myself, what is the point? I'm just gonna die anyway. Why does any of this matter? And honestly, for a moment, I thought the answer was it doesn't. But slowly over time, something shifted. I realized the gym had never really been about the body, i.e. the physical body. It was about being here, just in a body, alive, present, breathing. It wasn't performance, it was contact, with myself, with the moment. One of my all-time favorite quotes from Carl Jung: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. I'd seen the illusion, now I had to build something true in form. Meaning isn't found in the head, it's constructed in lived reality, in the work of your hands, in the service you offer, in the art that costs you something, in the small acts you choose even when no one sees. When I touched creation, and this is what I spoke about a lot of in detail in the last video I made, when I'd turn that camera on, when I'd start editing a video, I felt connected again. Not because achievement somehow saved me, but because expression bridged the inner and outer worlds. Creation became how I remembered that quiet presence beneath everything. And eventually life softened, not suddenly, but more like the way morning arrives. I stopped waiting for meaning to return from the sky. I started noticing it in small places I'd always overlooked. Editing a video and losing track of time. A conversation that went deeper than expected. The sound of rain at night. A moment where I felt understood. People think spirituality is about escaping life, but for me, it became about showing up to it more honestly. Re-Enchantment wasn't a miracle, it was participation. I met life halfway, and it met me back. If nothing is inherently meaningful, then everything is potentially meaningful. At some point, after sitting with the silence long enough, my relationship with nihilism shifted. It didn't suddenly become optimism. It was never that tidy. It was more like, if life came with no built-in meaning, then I was free to meet it however I chose. Not because my choices mattered universally, but because I'm here, now. I'm breathing, I'm experiencing, I'm participating. It stopped feeling like nothing matters, so why try? And it became more like nothing matters, so I might as well live fully. This wasn't hope. It might sound hopeful, but it wasn't quite that. But it wasn't despair either. Just a sort of quiet willingness to be here, to take the ride and to engage with life, even with no guarantees. I think that's where absurdism began for me. Not meaninglessness, but meaning through participation, which is a choice that we're all free to make. And again, not because someone told us to, it's not because we're trying to prove anything, but it's because choosing is part of being human. Meaning isn't something you find like a hidden object, it's a relationship. It grows as you show up for it. Eventually I started to notice a pattern, a kind of shape to the inner journey. And it wasn't just mine, but it was one that I'd seen in others too. We all inherit a story, we fall out of it, we enter the void, and if we're lucky, we return. In alchemy, this first stage is called Negredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul. But it isn't the end, it's the beginning of gold. The work is to turn confusion into contribution, void into art, pain into guidance. That's how a person becomes a passage for something universal, how the personal becomes more than itself. And when you return from the void, even just a little, something changes. You stop asking what's the meaning of life, and you start asking, what am I willing to give myself to? That's when meaning returns. If you're in the quiet right now, if life feels distant, hollow, or even just strangely thin, don't run from it. You haven't failed. You're being reformed, refined. Every true journey has an underworld. The ancients wrote about it in pretty much every language. Hades, the belly of the whale, the valley of the shadow. All different names, yes, but pretty much the same passage. It isn't exile. It's initiation. You step out of the world you knew, not to vanish, but to be tempered. Because before a sword can shine, it must literally survive the fire. So stay. Listen. Do what I did. Make something small and honest. Even when your hands don't know why they're moving. Even when your voice feels lost, feels thin. Meaning doesn't arrive like a revelation. It returns like morning light. It's slow, soft, and unannounced. It hides in simple offerings, calling someone you love, showing up for a friend, stepping outside just to breathe, writing one true sentence. Not because any of these things will change the world, but because they change you. And through you, the world then changes. Meaning isn't declared, it's cultivated. It grows each time you choose to participate instead of disappear. At some point you begin to sense that your story isn't just personal, it's part of an older pattern, a path that every seeker eventually finds themselves on. We inherit a life, we fall out of it, we wander in the dark, and, if grace allows, we return. But we're not the same, we're deeper, hollowed of illusion and able to hold more truth. This is what the mystics meant when they said, you must descend to ascend, not to escape the world, but to meet it from the inside, to walk back through your own door and recognize it as sacred. This is the quiet heroism no poem glorifies, the decision to remain, to touch life again, though you know it can break you. The return is not loud. There are no trumpets, there are no crowds. It's just you, breathing, taking one step and then another. Maybe awakening was never about leaving the story behind, but learning to carry it with clearer eyes, to bring heaven to earth, to choose again and again what you will give your life to. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it won't be without fear. We're all human at the end of the day. But truthfully, one page at a time. And eventually you realize something quiet but enormous. Meaning is not found, it is made. And the one who makes it is you.